This video contains spoilers for a few massive films. I understand and frankly encourage viewing those which you have not already. Thank you for watching. To anyone familiar with the concept of war movies, one name readily emerges accompanied by a discussion on the display of violence and murder. In an article published November 11th, 1973 for the Chicago Tribune, French filmmaker François Truffaut comments on the portrayal of murder within his films. I find that violence is very ambiguous in movies. For example, some films claim to be anti-war, but I don't think I've really seen an anti-war film. Every film about war ends up being pro-war. Indeed, film has a long, colourful history when it comes to its portrayal of war, a pattern of glorifying violence in battle to the degree of near fetishization. Violence and murder go a long way to invoke powerful imagery, overall leading to an enjoyable viewing experience, but does little in the way of true meaning. Thus, every film depicting war can often be sorted into one of two categories. Does the film utilizing this imagery create ethical and moral understanding, or does it merely feature this imagery to benefit the entertainment of its audience? As noted by author Agnieszka Soltysik, a film's resultant effect on enlistment rates provides ample confirmation on its usefulness. This can be no better seen than in 1949's Sands of Iwo Jima and 1987's Full Metal Jacket. Both films have proven to be incredibly effective on an increase in enlistment rates. This showcases the consequential effect that war movies place on their control of the audience, leading to an increased importance on the questioning of war movies' contents. However, it is first required to establish the common themes set in war movies. How can we view a film as contributing to a sense of anti/pro-war? The original 1930 version of the film All Quiet on the Western Front achieves one aspect of this in a very confronting and intriguing way. Paul Bäumer, the soldier and central figure of the film, starts the story as a simple student, one of many in a class led by Professor Kantorek, who is lecturing the students on enlistment. He is preceded by a shot of newly enlisted soldiers marching into battle. The town populace screams and cheers as they parade through the streets. Their chanting acts as a backdrop to the professor's impassioned speech, their marches visible through the large open windows. It's made incredibly obvious how on the nose this all seems. A parade, a facade, a tactic, one utilized by the professor to coerce his crowd of students. Without a hint of uncertainty, he decrees the necessity to enlist in war, to be the line of defense, and to risk it all for their country. Even the employment of manipulation through guilting the students is not thrown out by the professor. Other classes have risen with enthusiasm. Why can't you be the same? Your father and your mother shall not be weak. Go make them proud. Give to your country what your country has sacrificed to you. What the professor is doing here is deluding them, using deceit to make them feel vulnerable, forcing them to envision a fruitful life at war, filled with pride, prestige, and admiration. They've been tricked, and now they've complied. Immediately following enlistment, the boys are sent to boot camp. Here we enter one of my favorite scenes in the movie. The boys dash into a tightly packed room, every one of them glowing with excitement. Without future knowledge, they each share aspirations on what they wish to become, the most exciting thing they want to do in war. Cavalry, says one. Infantry, shouts another, one going as far as to request a bayonet drill. Then they all start. That aside, we're shown an incredible display at how deluded these soldiers have become, how simple it was to convince these students and plant a false image in their heads. The professor, the catalyst to the whole enlistment, shows up one more time a whole 2 hours into the film. Here Paul, who if you remember was our lead protagonist, is placed on leave after a resulting leg injury. He returns with a newly enlightened knowledge to the tragedies of battle, witnessing friends and armies of people be wiped out in mass. Paul sits among his father and college professor as they cheer him for his service. The professor, who first coerced Paul to join the war, encourages yet another expedition into battle. Paul, newly aware of their lies and manipulation, barks down any argument they make to encourage a return. The director uses this scene as a way to create a contrast between what we hear versus what we see. By this point in the film, we know the facts of war. We We know the exact brutality of it, and we know that that is completely disconnected from the words of the professor. One application of this theory can be through propaganda, a marketed ideal of war which is separate from the truthful enactment of those ideals. Although this theme isn't isolated to a few scenes, and certainly not a single movie, the message of war being a manipulative tactic to coerce civilians into soldiers is a recurrent theme within films listed as anti-war. Thus, an attribute of an anti-war film is a sense of disillusionment, wasting no time or clarity in explaining war as one big lie. But disillusionment can only go as far as to describe the pre-enlistment stage of war, in terms of how exactly war is different from the marketed ideals of disillusionment can be seen in the psychological infliction on soldiers. Likely the most abundant use of anti-war themes is through this psychological damage. Steven Spielberg, director of the film Saving Private Ryan and contributor of £8 million in private jet emissions, largely challenges the belief of Francois Truffaut. Of course, every movie, good or bad, is an anti-war movie. This belief is highly controversial. My personal opinion disagrees that by showing something to be unappealing, it does its duty at dissuading it. One rebuttal for this argument can be framed through the use of pro-war films. Plenty of pro-war propaganda centers around the message that you must work hard to prove your worth, and this comes with the challenge of a trial. To make war seem simply unappealing does not constitute an anti-war message. It may empower pro-war notions that war is a difficult and honorable task. Why else does war seem so enticing, providing young soldiers a way of passage and a desire which caters to our love of trial and prevalence? This idea can be viewed within Spielberg's own film. How much do the brutal scenes in Saving Private Ryan accomplish to make war seem unappealing? Or do they only serve to fetishize violence and battle? The film follows our main posse of characters as they fight strenuously to retrieve a lost soldier. In the opening scene of the movie, we catch a glimpse of Private Daniel Jackson, a marksman armed with a rifle and incredible aim. His scenes are played up as though he is always a few steps ahead, stronger and smarter than his opponents, even superhuman to some extent, talented to an unnatural degree. Just one bullet stands between him and successfully taking down the enemy. The balance here is skewed. It always falls in favor of courage and talent, as though war is decided by the skill of the shooter, not by the luck you possess. This idea harkens back to the notion that you must be talented to fight. You must train until you are strong, until you can prove you're ready to battle. This nonsensical folktale is notoriously counted upon to enlist naive young men, told that if you're skilled enough, you'll survive. Additionally, Saving Private Ryan repeatedly runs into an issue when ignoring the wider consequences of violence. The use of weaponry 20 minutes into the film and the "don't shoot, let 'em burn" dialogue asks a number of viable questions. Which side are we following? What are the repercussions of this act? Where is the hesitation or any moral questioning to the deployment of such a weapon? A weapon that could have very easily been used in a reverse scenario and framed in a completely different perspective. This scene never sees reprehension or justification for its application. It just sits there, as though we weren't really meant to care about it. Why isn't this act treated as significant? Were these soldiers simply not important enough? I don't buy into the narrative that it just simply doesn't matter, that these victims should only serve to be plot points for our main cast. There is simply no way for me to explain why they don't have a movie, yet these characters do. In war, we're not following a set of characters, we're watching as people are being murdered. To convey this idea, we shouldn't pass off moments like this one. These soldiers were people too. They probably had families waiting back home for them to return. Yet the film hides that question behind the tension of the scene. It doesn't allow us the time to think over their actions and digest what's going on. All Quiet on the Western Front was married to this question. It wanted you to know those soldiers were people too. And there's a scene an hour and 16 minutes into the original film which orchestrates this idea perfectly. Paul waits, horrified, at the bottom of a large bomb crater, clutching his gun tight and nervously peeking at the chaos above him. Even in the moment of conflict, Paul is trying to escape here, but it's far too late. He's now caught in the midst of battle. Eventually, after noticing the French soldiers leap over his head, Paul Paul strikes at the opportunity to drag one down with him, stabbing the French soldier within an inch of his life. We watch for an excruciating 7 minutes as Paul looks upon a dying man, clambering up next to him to stroke his shoulder, desperately promising to help the man. A flurry of bullets soar overhead, impacting explosions overwhelm the audio. We catch sounds of moaning between impacts, that which is not drowned out by the surrounding war. We know the soldier is barely clinging to life. Paul notices this too. Being so tortured by the events of war, he can't figure out how to respond. At first he loses composure, demanding the moaning to stop, screaming to just die so it can all end, before dragging himself up to reassure the soldier of his safety, resting his hands over his body and telling him he'll return home. The sounds of battle still echo across the battleground, arguing against Paul's word of reassurance. The French soldier dies before Paul even gets the chance to notice, left helplessly scooping water into his mouth, still desperate to save the person he tried to kill moments earlier. The film then provides us a moment away from the dialogue, to acknowledge the sounds of war and a moment to grieve the enemy, before allowing Paul to once again beg, pleading for forgiveness. When you jumped in here, you were my enemy, and I was afraid of you, but you're just a man like me, and I killed you. Forgive me, comrade. God, this movie's so fucking good. I wish I could just play the whole scene. Abolish copyright for the love of God. The remake contains an identical scene as well, this time possibly more visceral, and lasting for a total of 8 minutes. The largest fault is having this shitty somber music. It was far more impactful hearing the whistle of bombs overhead. I wish they kept it. What these scenes serve to do is humanize the enemy. They are just as much the main character as any soldier in war. A barrage of millions, each with their own story to tell. There is no death in this film that deserved to happen. Nothing is to be gained and everything is to be lost. It's tragic. It's beautiful. It is an anti-war film. I believe Saving Private Ryan fails to understand this idea. Wouldn't the film have greatly benefited if the characters deliberated more on their actions? This isn't to say the film fails on every front, and I'm not here to dispel the belief that Saving Private Ryan is an all-time classic. My entire motivation to watch the film came from my mother. She adores the film as one of her favorites, and the interesting thing about that is, she agrees with me. She doesn't see the film as some fantastic statement on the treatment of war. She sees the film as simply enjoyable. It's a great viewing experience with engaging characters and emotional scenes. A notion I have to agree with. Please, watch the film if you haven't. It's good. I will even credit the film on its use of psychological deterioration within the characters. To me, that's the central focus of the film. Deterioration. Captain John Miller is developing Parkinson's, which gradually increases throughout the film's runtime. The optimism of the soldiers is insidiously shrinking. They're not enjoying the war. It's no game to them. It's torture. Eventually, a few of them begin to crack, and question why the hell they're being shot. Sure, that attitude is sparsely provided for the opposing side, but regardless, war isn't treated like a trial or activity, rather a truly nightmarish hell. We see the weight that this war brings to these soldiers, and the ruined state it leaves them in. We understand that this war is not just killing them, but breaking them. When they shift through tags of fallen soldiers, the remaining look on with faces of anguish. They may still be walking, but something in them has died. Something only the war can take. Although, I'm kinda playing devil's advocate here. I'm the one interpreting this. I'm having to collect all of this information and format it to support this anti-war narrative. Because whilst I do believe those themes are present, the clarity in which they are shown is shaky at best. At least overshadowed by the cool guys with guns trying to save the day. The strategy and planning that went into Saving Private Ryan makes for a great film, but does little in the way of powerful messaging. Overall, the plot of the film felt linear. It misses the sporadic and unpredictable nature of war as it appeared for the soldiers. Every death felt not like a tragic ending, but a plot point to push our main cast forward. War didn't feel like a game of luck. where anyone had the chance of dying, and they didn't feel at the mercy of orders made by men far more powerful than they could imagine. They felt like heroes, and that doesn't sit right with me. Furthermore, the film seemed to center around the Americans, rather than simply feature them. Whilst to the credit of the film, it showcases the degeneration of the soldiers' mental state, and gives a wonderful psychological portrait to the characters, it doesn't exactly achieve the goal of framing the war as the result of this effect. Who is truly being affected by this film, and what does that have to say about war? Once again, I draw comparison to All Quiet on the Western Front, specifically this scene in the remake, which treats us to one of the more tragic moments within the film. Chardin, a German soldier and friend of Paul, is provided cutlery to consume food whilst he lay injured across the floor. Chardin essentially uses this to conclude his story, to choose death instead of enduring any more torture. It is one of the more brutal scenes within the movie. I love this film for not wasting any clarity in telling you that war is torturous. It doesn't want any skepticism on where this damage is originating. It is unabashedly a film about war, in its purest form. Let us now return to the classroom scene from the original All Quiet on the Western Front. In the moments after sitting down with his dad and the professor, we enter the setting from the classroom Paul used to attend. The same professor is now encouraging a new batch of students to enlist in the war. This scene nearly mirrors that from the beginning of the film. The dialogue from the professor is eerily matched. The students in the classroom are framed as nothing more than a recycled opportunity to boost the numbers of soldiers that often never come back. These students are practically stripped of their human qualities, in place as just another enlistment, brought in through the same tactics as always. The disposability of soldiers is exemplified in the first moments of battle. When Joseph Bain, a friend and classmate of Paul, is killed, the sergeant immediately dismisses the prospect of Bain being a friend. Instead, he is referred to as a corpse, no matter who it is. This depicts the view of soldiers as nothing but bodies. Bodies that sometimes die, then they're just one less body. In her paper, Agnieszka describes her interpretation of the bombings shown in All Quiet on the Western Front. There is nothing heroic, glorious, or even courageous about withstanding a deafening mortar attack for hours. It is a miserable, supremely passive experience, where survival is a matter of chance. The 2022 remake of the film, while sharing many similar qualities, diverges in a number of ways. One particular example is through the recyclability of soldiers. After tearing the leftover dog tags from bodies, the names etched into each one are recorded in scarily quick succession. The shot focuses on the remaining mountain of tags, a mountain so high the counting must be stopped to avoid being excessive. This is meant to demonstrate the sheer scale of war, a number of lives so vast it eventually becomes unnecessary to count, to even utter the remaining names of those who supposedly died for their country. The symbol of these tags is meant to parallel the complementary symbol of the uniforms. They are ripped from the soldiers in short succession from one another. Tags first. The uniform, taken next, is a symbol for the disposability and recyclability of soldiers. This symbol is seen within the opening moments of the film. We catch a glimpse of life in the surrounding forest, a nestling family of foxes, the stillness of trees, and a whistle in the wind. The moment is brief and eerily silent, meant to contrast against the following sequence, where a field of dead soldiers lay dormant and unmoving. What's left is scavenged for clothing, cleaned, resewn, and reused. Old uniforms overturned from past use and fitted for the next batch of soldiers. The names once embroidered into each piece torn off and thrown aside. Any humanity left in that name now becomes no use to the officers and generals recruiting these soldiers, as if they were only puppets, facelessly wearing the uniforms into battle. In doing so, All Quiet on the Western Front poignantly displays the unredeemed deaths of soldiers, the replaceability of humans, the concluding trait of the dishonorable. Whilst the remake takes the unfortunate sacrifice of removing the classroom scene, it compensates by expressing its message through action. The 1930 film shows the cycle of replaceable soldiers through the professor and his speech. The 2022 remake shows the same cycle through its symbol of the uniform. In the end, they accomplish the same goal, one verbally and the other symbolically. For this reason, I often find it upsetting when people dismiss the remake as providing nothing to the series, when my personal viewing experience noticed a number of different aspects that ultimately added to the combined message between the films. I think each version needed each other, complementing the overall message of dishonorability in their own way. The remake is notably different from the source material, an angle which may dissuade some viewers, but in doing so the film provides a number of unique aspects to the story. Neither film needs to exist on their own. There needs no debate on which version is better. The full experience requires both films. The original version didn't share the same turnover symbolism as the remake. There was a particular scene which may have inspired the symbol, occurring in the makeshift hospital for injured soldiers. We watch as an injured soldier is removed from their bed, their wounds too severe to treat. A conversation sparks between Paul and another patient of the hospital. The patient is supposedly mad from suffering head trauma. We learn from this interaction those removed soldiers are stripped of their clothes, their once occupied bed now cleared for the next patient. It's not identical, and certainly not conveyed with such clarity as the remake, but it's grounds for motivation. At least that's my theory, take it how you will. Our hospital setting also doubles as symbolism during another scene, this time much earlier in the film. Part of our main cast and friend group, Franz Kemrick, lays emotional and wounded on a small bed tightly packed around a mass of injured soldiers. The scene makes us sit with these two characters, watch as they embrace, consoling each other through tears. Franz instructs Paul on what to do with his belongings, how to carry on and use them for himself. Paul, distraught, runs through the hospital in search of a doctor. Hopelessly, of course. The limited number of doctors couldn't possibly cater for everyone. A supervisor informs Paul on the number of patients they've seen die that day, and in a slightly dismissive tone, Franz would only be the 17th, making him reduced to nothing but a number, and the spare leather boots left in his passing, because that's all these soldiers could be. A dog tag, a uniform, a statistic. That sound plays 3 different times during the film. According to the limited number of sources I read, the intention is to assault the audience. A stinger, a jolt of action, like if a bullet spontaneously flew by your head. I hate this narrative. I find it boring and uninteresting. Why should we reduce this clearly intentional drum pattern to such little value? It's a very patriotic sound, a central instrument in marching bands or parades. Should it be any coincidence 2 of the instances we hear this sound occur during the perspective of a new character, Matthias Erzberger. He is a powerful figure within the film. His role is to convince General Foch to an armistice. Together they are capable of ending the war. They are terrifyingly powerful. As Erzberger will tell you, all that's left separating us from an armistice is false pride. Our connection to the powerful leaders in the remake is seldom seen within the other variants. I don't find another example of power being displayed so egregiously other than when General Friedrich stands atop a building, undisturbed by the distant battle. The sounds of echoing bombshells have no impact on where he stands, safe from the brutality just within his sight. You've likely recognized I've only mentioned 2 instances of this drumbeat, either time accompanied by a scene from a powerful leader practically deliberating on their own power. But there's a 3rd time this sound shows up, and it feels a little harder to quantify. Major spoiler warnings for the entire film coming up, by the way. If you want to sit this part out, you can cut to this timestamp. As the war draws to a close, Kat finds new motivation for one last heist to steal a goose from a local farm. We progressively come to discover the song foreshadowed much earlier in the film had an eerie prophecy to it. As foretold in the lyrics, the heist inevitably goes awry, our soldiers narrowly escaping the fury of the farmer, although not entirely away from danger. Followed through the forest and stalked, Kat, once vulnerable and separated, is ambushed, shot and left to bleed. A great distance from the nearest hospital, injured and dying, Paul comforts his friend, hoisting him to his feet and beginning to march to the nearest outpost. We hear the drum. It may be out there, and possibly a bit of a reach, but the drum is a symbol of the elite. To even hold power once war is drawing to a close, the ability to glimmer a light at the end of the tunnel, and so easily snuff it out. War has taken everything from these men. Power will not stop until it has achieved maximal destruction. I won't hold myself to simple metaphors, instead providing an additional scene on power and control, mere moments after Chardin tragically dies. realize. Kat and Paul grieve over the purpose of war, to the burden they must acknowledge, stuck to them and weighing on their mind. The death of their friends, lost to the battle. The stench will remain with us forever, Paul cries, being met with a sharp remark from Kat. Is that to do with us? We didn't ask for it, the others didn't ask for it, but nonetheless it happened, and nonetheless half the world is involved. God looks down on us murderers. All this time, I've neglected an incredibly important factor in war: remembrance. Those who have died in war. What was it all worth? As German soldiers rejoice at the war coming to an end, Paul challenges the joyous tone of the setting, shouting, "Are there any sergeants left?" to anyone around him to listen. To Paul, the war might be over, but those men were still killed. There is no one to claim victory, and without victory, there is only loss. We must understand that we are seeing a representation of reality. The characters may be fictitious, but their environment is all too real. This really happened, and it wasn't just a short story either, but years of battle. Ideally, the audience would be prompted with a question on purpose. Although a film cannot easily integrate worth into its story without a dramatic shift in time, the question often requires age for its characters to reflect. In practice, All Quiet on the Western Front explores the basic extent of worth within film. Despite how trite it may be, a simple sequence of text can elicit such a message. As the film rests on a still shot of a tranquil landscape, we cut to black and are treated with this message. Shortly after the end of the hostilities in October 1914, the Western Front froze into positional warfare. By the end of the war in November 1918, the front line had barely moved. More than 3 million soldiers died here, often while fighting to gain only a few hundred meters of ground. Almost 17 million people lost their lives in the First World War. All quiet on the Western Front. Is it perfect? No. Is it even clever? Hardly. It almost feels like a bit of a cop-out to insert just a wall of text at the end of the film. Like, sorry, we didn't convey this well enough during the movie. Here's a little explanation for your convenience. But at the end of the day, it's still an important attribute, despite lacking delivery. It would be wrong of me not to include this aspect of cinema if I were attempting to catalogue anti-war themes. They were victims. And what corpse gives a damn about honorability? Oh, and so we're clear, this entire video is just a way to make you watch the All Quiet on the Western Front films. I don't make the rules. Sorry, not sorry. Bye.